Modern travel often involves a search for deep geographical isolation. Many young travelers are moving away from managed resorts, choosing instead to find undocumented locations where the only infrastructure is the environment itself. 5 college students, Arav, Kabir, Neil, Tanya, and Ria, were looking for this specific isolation. They bypassed the standard tourist trails to head toward a remote village in the hills where Neil's grandparents lived. As they climbed higher, the air grew heavy. The ambient sounds of traffic and connectivity vanished, replaced by a wall of dense fog and a silence so thick it felt like physical pressure. By late afternoon, the village streets were empty. Every door was bolted from the inside. Even with the sun still visible through the mist, the locals had retreated into a total defensive lockdown. The students saw this silence as part of the rural charm. They treated the villagers' extreme caution as a backdrop for their trip, viewing the local survival tactics as an atmospheric detail for their adventure. Inside the house that night, the grandmother eventually spoke about the history of the surrounding woods. She described the forest as a place that had been walled off by the community for 20 years. 2 decades ago, the forest housed a functioning summer camp until a single night forced it to close. 5 students hiked into the woods. By sunrise, only 4 walked out. The 5th vanished, leaving no evidence of departure. The village responded by ceding the territory. The 7 p.m. curfew is the community's way of maintaining a border between themselves and the campsite, treating the forest as a permanent danger zone. Driven by the pressure of the group and a feeling of safety in numbers, the students ignored the local warning. At 11 p.m., they quietly gathered their gear and crossed the boundary into the trees. They moved deep into the woods, eventually reaching the skeletal remains of the original campsite, where wooden structures were slowly collapsing into the forest floor. The entity began its surveillance immediately. While Ria reported the feeling of eyes on them from the darkness, Kabir laughed it off, convincing the others to stay and focus on the bonfire. This schematic shows Arav's discovery. Fresh footprints in the mud didn't belong to the group. These tracks emerged from the deepest ruins and stopped exactly where they sat, proving something had been waiting. At 2 a.m., the psychological pressure broke. A human scream tore through the camp, and the group's flashlights went dark simultaneously. As they crowded into a single tent, they saw a tall, human-shaped shadow pacing back and forth on the canvas outside. By 4 a.m., Kabir was gone. All that remained were deep, heavy drag marks in the dirt, leading into the blackest part of the forest. The entity's actions show a calculated pattern. It didn't attack the group as a whole, but waited to isolate a single person and remove them once the group's defenses had been compromised by fear. The 4 survivors fled the campsite at first light. They arrived back at the village breathless and trembling, their gear abandoned in the woods. They burst into the grandparents' home, sobbing as they described how Kabir had been taken. But the grandparents stood frozen. They counted only 4 people in the room, the same 4 people who had arrived the day before. The grandmother pulled out a printed record from the original camp closure 20 years ago. It was a group photo of the 5 students who had originally entered the woods. Staring back at them from the faded image was Kabir. He was the student who had vanished 2 decades earlier, wearing the exact same clothes and the same smile. The group realized they couldn't remember Kabir's life before the spring semester. They had no memory of his family, his hometown, or how they had actually met him. He had simply appeared in their lives 3 months before the trip. Arav's phone buzzed with a message. It was a photo of the group from the previous night, taken from the darkness of the trees. Behind the 4 of them stood Kabir, his eyes solid black. The message below said, "Next summer, I am coming back." Arav looked up from the phone to see Neil smiling. As they watched, Neil's jawline began to shift, and his eyes deepened, his features realigning into the face of the boy from the 20-year-old photograph. The entity leaves the campsite by assuming the identity of the group it just dismantled. It uses the survivors to walk back into the city, hiding in plain sight until it can lure the next set of victims back to the ruins.